Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Before I start potentially talking to myself, can I just make sure that everyone can hear and see me? You should be able to see me, you should be able to see my screen, and you should be able to hear me. So would someone be able to put something in the chat just to make sure? Brilliant, thank you very much. Okay, so I'm Sam, as many of you know. I'm the Academy Manager, and I'm the one who hosts a lot of these webinars. And you might recognize my voice from a lot of the training videos that we have in Infigo and in the Academy. This particular webinar is a little bit different from the normal ones that we do for those that are familiar with them. Instead of showing you specific features and spending a lot of time going through them, we're instead going to focus on a product build, hopefully from start to finish, but we'll see how we get on over the course of the hour. As a result, it is going to be quite fast-paced, so we can get through as much as possible. I'm not going to be explaining everything in a huge amount of detail. I'm just going to be sort of firing through the process of building this up. Now, it was at this point I wanted to introduce Duncan, who might be on the call as well, but I think he might be delayed for a couple of minutes. So hopefully when he does arrive, Duncan will be manning the chat. Duncan's a member of our support team, and I'm sure many of you have had some interactions with him in the past. He's been with Infigo pretty much from the start, more or less, I think, so he knows his stuff. And if those questions come in during the chat, he should hopefully be able to answer them. Just checking the chats just to see. So yeah, you're seeing some potential disconnections and that kind of thing. But generally, we seem to be okay, so we'll see how we get on. And let me just send a very quick message to Duncan just to make sure he's not forgot. Okay, so what we're actually going to do, as I say, is just make a business card template from start to finish. The reason we've chosen a business card is just because it is nice and simple, and it allows us to see a lot of what Invent can do. So this is the product that we're going to be working on. This is obviously not in Invent. This is it being brought over into MegaEdit. And it's got various features, such as the ability to sort of change the design, change the colors, input information based on a form over on the right hand side, and it's got loads of other little features in there that we'll go through during the course of the webinar. You can access this if you want it for reference, and there's also a product landing page that I'll copy into the chat in a moment, where if you want to have a go with this alongside me, or if you have time after the webinar, you can download the resources and have a go yourself if you really want to do so. So let me just input that information. So that is on an open storefront, so you should all be able to access and download that. Okay. So let's get started so we're not wasting a lot of time. So I'm going to start on the actual logo side, or what I'm calling the logo side of the business card. So I'm going to keep referring back to my completed MegaEdit product just to show you what we're going to try and actually build as we're proceeding through. The logo side, as I'm calling it, is nice and simple. So we're going to have the ability to change this little crop mark that's in the bottom right-hand corner, so a simple switch of image. And we're also going to have the ability to change the background color to a selection of our branding colors. But in conjunction with that, based on the background color that we've got selected, the logo that we're going to use will change as well. So there'll be a bit of logic in the background there as well. So going into Invent, or into InDesign with the Invent tab open, I've got a blank version of this particular product. And what we're going to start off with is the actual logo itself. So we're going to start off just with creating a resource set, which is going to contain those logo options within that resource set. So create a resource set. It's just going to be a couple of static clip art images. Enter a name. and then upload the relevant resources. I'm also going to create a variable at the same time as I create this resource. We've got this little checkbox, which allows us just to create a drop-down variable very, very quickly to save us that additional specification time. Okay, and then all we need to do is to actually connect that variable and that resource to that frame. So my properties, enable the frame that we're working with, and then link the associated variable. Okay, so the next one is the crop mark frame that we've got here. Two elements to this one. We're going to be controlling the image that's within the frame and the color of the background itself. And both of those can be controlled within that same frame. So another resource to create, or two more resources to create here. One is the available crop marks. So again, that's going to be a set of clip art imagery. Again, I'll create a variable for that one automatically so we can switch between them. And then I'm also going to create a color set. So this is going to be my brand colors that I can select between. And I'm going to do this as an actual color set itself. A little bit more configuration required with this one. So we're entering the name of the color, specifying what the color is, either in CMYK or RGB, and then adding that to our list of potential colors. Now I do have some RGB data hidden away in my resources. So I've got this on my other screen and I'm just going to start inputting some of those. Two more. And there we go. And again, I'll link that to a variable. Okay. Now, we've created those resources, we've created those variables. Now we just need to link them to the relevant frame. So I'm going to enable that frame. I've got both my image and my general tab. So one will control the image, one will allow me to control the background. And I'm going to link those variables once again. Okay, next, we're going to actually modify the form that the user is actually going to see at the end of this entire process. So if I go to my variables tab, you can see those variables that we automatically set to create are now available. I'm going to go to setup forms, and this is where I can design my customer facing form. So at the moment, or what it is by default, is all of the controls on one page, on one list, regardless of which page of the product you're on. I'm going to switch that so it's actually a per page form. And then I'm just going to add two of those to this page here. So I don't need every single variable on the form. Some of the variables, as we'll see, will be controlled in the background by our logic, or don't really have to be controlled at all if you don't want them to be. So I'm just going to make sure I select the right ones. I've got my crop mark option and my brand colors. They're the only two I want available on the form. And then I'm going to create some logic. Now, this is the logic which is going to change the logo that's displayed based on the brand color that's selected. Again, that's on the variables tab, setup logic. And this is basically where we're just creating some if statements to control what happens in certain scenarios. So I'm going to create a new piece of logic, which I'm going to call logo selection. And then we're creating conditions, actions, and then alternate actions or else parts to the if statement. So this is going to be if the brand color selection is equal to, and I get a list of all the brand colors that we have available. So I can say the lighter colors, so place blue or white. Then the resulting action is that the logo that's selected, so my logo variable, set value is going to be the color version of the logo. Now I just need to complete out the if statement with an else, so it actually knows what to do in the reverse scenario. And that's going to be the logo set value to white. So that should be a completed statement. Okay, so at various stages during the course of this process, I am going to export this information and take it over into MegaEdit. This is partially to show you what we've done so far, and partially for my own sanity, because the chances of me going an entire hour without making a mistake on a live demo is very, very slim. So, win-win for everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and export this as a MEX file. And you would do this during your development anyway to actually make sure that you're progressing as you expect. Just going to set my export file. Start my validations just to make sure everything's fine, and then export. Now I'm going to jump into Infigo, create a new product, business card, select our MegaEdit product, and then upload the invent package that I've just created. So that being the MEX file that we just created. That will upload all of that information for us, including the logic and all the resources, and we should be able to launch that product straight away and see what we've done so far. So we can see there, I've got the ability to choose between my crop marks. And if I change the brand color to something lighter, the logo switches. All good so far. Okay. So that's it for that side of the business card. Obviously, the what I'm calling the info side of our business card is a little bit more complicated with a little bit more information. So what we're going to do is just work through these sort of field by field and just sort of do the whole configuration of that field one step at a time. So starting off with the top two, so the name and the job title, those are fairly simple in their eventual behavior. So if we have a look at the final product, all that we want those to do, and ignore the fact that we've got a resolution warning there, that's my own artwork that's caused that problem. So we want the ability for the user to actually enter information into the name and the job title, but then also a little bit more detail in that if a longer name is entered, we want it so that the text will automatically resize to fit that required text string. So let's take a look at that. First thing we're going to do is to go and create a text variable. So if I go ahead, add a variable, and go to text variable, this is just going to be my name. Now, there's lots of configuration options on here, a lot of which we'll cover in later fields down the course of the business card. The only thing we're going to do in this example is a placeholder, which is just going to be your name. We're then just going to link that variable that we created to that particular frame. And that's all we need to do for that one. Same process for the title. We'll create a variable, text variable, placeholder, and then link it to the frame. Now remember that we wanted to make it so that the text resized based on the text that was in the name to accommodate longer names. So if I go back onto my name field, you'll see there that we have this fit to box option, which in my example is already selected. By default, it won't be, which just means that the text will not change size. However, if you have fit to box selected, the text will resize based on the contents of that field. And you've also got the ability to add some more validation to this as well. So if you have got a minimum and a maximum font size you're willing to accept, you can input that in there as well. Now, not too dissimilar for the email. The only thing we want with the email in addition to this is the ability to do some kind of validation on the content of that email address. So for example, if I start just writing something that's clearly not an email address within there, you want that validation to tell you that it needs to be in that email format. So that's the only unusual thing on here. Similar process, I'm going to create a variable. This time I'm going to set my default value to be something that's already placed within the field itself, just to mix things up a bit. And just so we don't start off with an empty space. And then in order to get that email associated validation, we're just going to come down to this validation string down on the bottom right-hand side. So I'm going to say I want it to be validated. We can put our own custom validation in there if we like. However, I'm going to choose one of the presets, which is email. And then we could put a validation message in here as well, if we wanted to do so. And then I'm going to go ahead and just link that to the frame. Okay, so let me check one thing. So that's those three. That's nice and easy. Next, we're going to move on to the actual phone number, which is a little bit more complicated. So let's take a look at what that is going to be able to do at the end of this process. Excellent. Thank you, Windows. Okay. So our phone number. What we want at the end of this entire process is this kind of input here. So we're going to have two separate inputs, which is for the country calling code and for the actual phone number itself. However, we want it to be even a little bit more complicated than that. So if there's no country code and no phone number, we don't want that line to appear within the business card at all, which means that that little T icon needs to disappear as well. So let's have a look at what behavior we have. If I say UK calling code, you can see everything else moves down, which we will do towards the end of this process, but the T also appears. You can then input a phone number, and you'll also see we have some additional regex validation on here so that when I reach a certain number of characters, we get some auto formatting on that because it recognizes it as the required formatting for a phone number, for the one that we specified. So a few things we want to cover here. All right, starting off nice and easy, we just want to enable this T field here. They don't need to do any variables or anything like that. We just want mega edit at the end of the process to recognize that this is a variable field so we can control its visibility. So I'm just going to go and enable that one. And then as we mentioned, our phone number itself will be a calling code and telephone number. So the first thing to do here is I want a list of selectable country calling codes. So if I select the country, the calling code appears. Now, there's a few ways you could accomplish this. I'm going to do it as a sort of pre-existing data set, a pre-existing data resource in our product. So if I just go ahead and go to my resources, add resource set, and I'm going to create a text library. Now, what this is expecting is a key and text. So key is what will be shown in the form. Text is what the resulting thing on the canvas itself will be. So we could manually enter every single value in here, but obviously that would be absolutely horrendous. So what we do have is a pre-existing CSV of all of these different calling codes. And I'm just going to directly import this into my resource. So if I go back into Invent, give that a name, and then I'm just going to upload that CSV. You can see there that it's come through with all those for me. It's not got the plus icon in this one like it did in the example, but that would be a case of just changing the CSV before we imported it. But in the interest of time, I'm going to leave this as is. Once again, we want this as a drop-down variable, which will be visible on the form. So I'm just going to click this button here to simplify that process. Okay, the other thing we want is the phone number. Now, this is just going to be a variable that we can input into. So I'm just going to go add variable. It's going to be a text variable. I'll just call it phone. Now, you remember that on the actual eventual product, we had that auto formatting. So we had it so that once I reached a certain amount of characters, it would do a certain spacing. Now, this is accomplished using regex. This is not an Infigo concept. This is something that you can do, you can find on the wider internet. I find that ChatGPT is a great resource for helping you write these regex strings, to be honest. So that's my recommendation. I've got a pre-existing one here that I'm just going to copy and paste in the interest of time. But just going to create a brand new regex text manipulation. Say phone number formatting. And these inputs here are generally associated with regex. So you should be able to get these from online tools. I'm just going to copy and paste. I appreciate if you've never seen regex before, this is probably slightly terrifying. But what this is essentially doing is allowing us to format that number as we input it. There we go. That's now been created. And that's our two variables for calling code and for phone. Now we want both of those to be present in this same field. We could do them as two separate fields if we wanted, but we may as well have them in the same one. The way in which we do this is with actually inputting these as text-based variables, or that's probably bad terminology. But instead of doing it with the actual entire frame and linking the entire frame, you can just remove the text that's in there, make sure that the frame is active within Infigo, so that it actually recognizes it as variable. But then when you actually clicked within the frame to start accepting text, you'll see that the option changes here. And you've got the ability to select all of those variables that you've created. So I'm just going to say calling code and add. You see that adds this little code here to tell the system that that's the information it wants. I'm going to put a space because that will actually be considered. And then my phone variable. Okay, and then from here, I just want to make sure that we do have variable suppression. So because there are multiple variables in one field, we want to make sure that they behave correctly in relation to one another if one doesn't have any text in it. So we do this with variable suppression. So if I've got the field selected, I want to activate full variable suppression on my particular example. Now, the next step that we had here is to actually make it so that this T symbol here, which is a separate frame, is dependent on the behavior of the other field. So basically, if there's nothing in this telephone number field here, then the T shouldn't be there. So we can do this with spread behavior on our Invent template. We start this process off by grouping some fields together because they need to be associated with one another. This is a piece of InDesign functionality. It's not Invent as such. I'm just going to multi-select those fields, right-click, and say Group. Now you'll notice on my Invent tab, I now have the ability to enable that group. By default, it's given it just a generic ID number. We can change that within the Layers tab if we want to do so. And again, this is an InDesign tab. But now if I go back to Invent, you'll see that the group has been renamed to something much more suitable to what we want to do. So I'm going to enable that group. Then we get a few additional settings. First thing I'm going to do is to change my spread behavior. So this is what controls when things will appear and disappear and, well, how they will move relative to each other. So for example, we want things to move horizontally here rather than vertically when they need to do so. So when one disappears, the other will move horizontally, for example. So I'm going to set this to be spread horizontally. And because I want this one to always disappear when the phone number is empty, I'm going to set the actual phone number field to be my group master. So whatever happens to the phone number field, such as hide when placeholder is empty, will also happen to this other field, so the T symbol. Okay, and then my last step to sort out the phone number here is to actually just create another little bit of logic. So if I remember correctly when I was setting this up, this is more a case of just making sure that the behavior is nice and tidy. So for example, if you delete the phone number, then the calling code automatically gets set to none so that it just the whole thing disappears from the template. It just looks a bit nicer, feels a bit nicer when it's being used. So I'm going to put another bit of logic in there on my variables tab. She'll call this country code logic. And what I'm going to say here is that if the phone number equals nothing, so if it's left blank, then we want to also set the calling code to be, I think I have a blank entry in here as well. So I have a non-entry. So basically, as soon as that phone number field reaches a value of empty, so let's say you delete the thing that's in there, the automatic behavior will be to set the calling code to be blank as well, or the calling code to be none. Now, we do need to complete this if statement with some reverse behavior. So I'm just going to keep it simple in this one and just say calling codes just to be shown, basically. Now, this has no particular purpose. It's just to actually complete the statement. But this is the main bit of behavior that I want in this particular if statement. You just need to complete the statement before it can be utilized correctly. Okay, we're nearly at the point of another export. I just want to add this information to my form before I export so we can actually go ahead and test it. So go back to set up my forms. We can see all of our new variables are in there. I'm now setting up page 2. So it's our information side of things. And I'm actually going to start positioning things into groups here as well, just to make it a bit more tidy for us. So I'm going to create a new group, which I'm going to call details. I'll put that on page 2. And then I can drag and drop things into that details section. Name, title, email. And then I have another group, which is phone. And that will contain calling codes and phone number. Okay, so let's go ahead and export that and test it. Right, and we don't need to create a brand new product for this. We can just override the MEX file or the indent file that we've already imported. So if I go to the product that I already made, go to its mega edit config, and then to MEX import, select small text, I'm just going to upload a new MEX file. Let's try that product again. Cross my fingers and hope that everything's been set up correctly. Okay, so we can see the formatting. I can test my name inputs. I can test my email requirements. And then we can test our phone number. So you can see by default here that my phone number section isn't appearing at all, including the T symbol, which was a separate field. However, if I start putting in a calling code, you can see the T reappears. And then when I start inputting a phone number, once we reach a certain number of characters, we should get that regex kicking back in, and it automatically formats based on that regex. And then when I delete that phone number, it automatically switches the calling code back to none, which has a knock-on effect of hiding that T. So we're getting there. We're getting some complexity into our product. Now, this is my completed one again. The next stage here is my address field. So a little bit more detail in here. It starts off quite simple in the fact that we've just got this drop-down list choosing between a couple of different addresses. But we also want the ability to manually input an address as well. So what we've got is another section in here, which is custom. And when that custom option is selected, we get a new option appearing in the form, and then it gets rid of all of the text that's within our existing field. So if I start typing a new address in there, or nonsense text as that is, we can see that that has replaced any other text that was in there. But then as soon as we switch back to one of the existing addresses, our custom text disappears and it just shows the existing addresses. Okay, just seeing if there's anything else for this section. I think it's mainly address. So we go back to our invent screen. All right, first thing is to create a resource set, which is going to contain a couple of our pre-existing addresses. So text library, address options, and then you can manually import again. Otherwise, I'm just going to upload my pre-made CSV. So I've got a UK address, a Moldovan address, and custom. And once again, I'm going to create our dropdown. I'm going to create another variable, which is going to be for our custom address. This will be a text variable. However, we want this text variable custom address to only appear when custom is selected from that other variable that we've got created. So we don't want it to be visible all the time. So we do this by selecting a parent variable. So we can do this in the variable setup. I say that I want this custom address to be related to my address options. And then conditions to show the custom address is when my address options is a result of blank. And blank is what's shown when we've got custom selected, if that makes sense. Okay. So I just keep checking my notes to make sure I've not missed any steps. That should be fine. Now we've created those variables, but we do need to have them present within this field. But again, it's two variables. So we can't just override the entire field with one variable. We need to do the same thing as we did with the phone number and sort of enable the field, but then replace the text that's within the field with separate variables. So I've got my address options, address options and custom address. Okay. As always, we need to add this to our form before we can actually do anything with it. So I'm going to create a new address section and then add my two options to it. Okay, and then the final bit for the address section is yet another bit of logic. So I want to make sure that this always shows to be quite tidy. So for example, when we switch between one of our preset addresses and our custom address, we want to make sure that it's not showing one of the other values that we previously entered. So for example, if we enter something in custom, but then switch back to a pre-made address, we don't want it to still have that custom text. And I can accomplish this, again, probably in a few ways. I'm going to do it with some logic. So add logic. I'm just going to call this address logic. And then that's going to be if my address option variable does not equal blank, then I want to set my custom address variable to be blank. And again, this is the primary bit of functionality we want, but I still need an else to actually complete the statement. So I'm going to say add else, and I'm just going to say just show custom address. It's shown anyway, but it just completes the statement, and I'm not particularly bothered about the alternate behavior. Okay, right, so a couple more things to do before we test this once again. We've got our email field here, which isn't going to be variable, but we do want it to be recognized as a field within MegaEdit. So I'm going to enable that once again. And then we want to create this spread behavior. So what we want, as we saw on our final product, thank you once again, Windows. What we want on our final product, it's really not behaving, let's just do that, is when we start changing things in this whole section, which is multiple different fields, we want it so that other fields around it will move relative to it. So for example, if my email address is empty, everything else moves up. If I have no phone number, the address moves up. You can see there's a little problem with my particular configuration here, which I didn't see during my testing. So my problem with that one. Put my email address back in, everything else moves down. Phone number, everything else moves down. Get rid of the address, everything else moves up. So it's all this spread behavior where things are all related to one another. And we want to replicate that behavior as well. So this, kind of like the phone number, is going to be the creation of a group. So I'm just going to multi-select those fields. Now we don't need to multi-select the things that are already contained within a group. So if I just select one of those, for example, it recognizes they're already in a group. So it's a slightly different way that it displays. Select all of those, right click and group. Enable the group. There's going to be no group master in this one. We don't want one of these controlling the behavior of all the others. They're all going to be sort of equal. So if one disappears, the rest moves up. So the no group master option is going to be selected. And then my spread behavior here is going to be to spread vertically. So there's no horizontal movement desired. It's just vertical spread. Okay, and that should be it for that section. Let's just go ahead and export that one. So I'm just going to re-import that MEX file once again. And what we should see now is we've got our address options. It's showing me one of my preset addresses by default. They will change. If I go to custom, I get my additional box appearing. I can enter my custom address. So that all seems to be working fine. We can see as well that the spread behavior is working too. Everything's moving up and down as we would expect it to. Okay, so we're in the home stretch. A couple more things to show you. So if I jump to my final one yet again. So another option that I have on my form here is the ability to put a headshot on our business card. So this is essentially going to be a little frame that appears here, but we want the option to not show the headshot. And if headshot is not selected, then the frame shouldn't be there at all. We don't need to interact with it. However, if I click on this little checkbox here, that will then reveal the frame, and then we can upload the image that we want via the form. So this isn't choosing clip art in this case. This is uploading an image. So something like that. And then we can just get rid of it straight away if we need to. Okay. So let's begin with that process. First, we need a Boolean variable, so the true false variable, which is going to control whether or not we want a headshot. So I'm going to go for a variable, a Boolean variable, which is just going to be headshot required, let's call it. My default value will be false. It's nice and simple for a variable, a Boolean specification. We're then going to create another variable, which is for our image upload. So this is going to be an image variable. We'll just call it headshot upload. And kind of like we did with one of the fields earlier on, we want this visibility of this field to be reliant on that other field that we've created. So in this case, the checkbox. So I'm going to say enable parent variable, and I'm going to link that to our headshot required. Condition to show this variable is if headshot required is equal to true, so if it's checked. Now we can configure this image field because we can accept clip arts as well if you want it to do so. But we want it just to be an upload image here. So I'm going to say allow media album selection. So if you have already uploaded media albums, it can find those from a customer account. Allow image upload, which is what we primarily want. And I'll also say in this case that I don't want it to be cropped because I want it to show the entire circular image that I personally am uploading. And I don't want to allow any transformations to the image. So I want it to be fairly static. I don't want the customer to do anything with it apart from upload our pre-authorized, let's say, headshot. I'm going to save that and then link it to this frame, which is already on our InDesign file. Okay, as always, a bit of modification to the form. So we want to have the headshot section. I'll do it as a group again. And add my variables. And then again, one last bit of logic for this particular section is the fact that if we have the checkbox selected or not selected, we don't want the frame to actually appear on the artwork at all. So that's something we can control using the if statements and the logic. So I'll add something new here. I'll call this one headshot logic. And this is going to be if the headshot required variable is not selected, then we're going to hide the image frame. So if I say if the headshot required checkbox is not selected, then my resulting action, now this is actually going to be controlling one of the fields itself. So far, everything we've done here is just controlling other variables, but you can control fields that have been activated on the template as well. So in my case, I've already named all of the fields using this layer tab that we saw earlier on. However, you may need to do this if your InDesign file doesn't have this, as chances are it will just give you loads of random ID numbers by default. So I'm going to choose my headshot upload frame, which is identified as an image frame. And I'll say that if that's not selected, then it's going to hide it. This time I do want the alternate to that if statement. So this is going to be show the headshot upload. So basically, if the headshot required is selected, then it's going to show that frame. Okay. 10 minutes left. So the last thing to control on here, which is just something I added as a point of interest, really. This is our final one again, is this theme selection. Now, how representative this is of a real business card, I don't know, but it shows a nice bit of functionality. If I start selecting this, you'll see that I've got multiple things happening on multiple different fields. And it can do multiple things at once. It can change the image that's being utilized. It can change the color of the text. It can change the font, the size, the position. There's so many things we can get our logic to do. And this is what the logic is focusing on. Now, it is a very manual process, this. So I'm not going to do every single one of these, but I will do a selection of them just to demonstrate. So if I go back here, I'm going to create another couple of resources first because we did have this image that was automatically changing. So clip art set, flipped crop mark. I'll add those. Then we need a Boolean variable, which in our case is just going to change between one theme and the other, but it could be a drop-down list. It could be various things to choose between. And before I forget, I'm going to add that theme selection to our form. Right, the last bit to do on here is to create that little bit of logic to control this behavior. So once again, we're going to go to our logic screen, add logic. I'm just going to call this theme logic. And then as I mentioned, I'm only going to do a few examples here, not every single one, or it might take quite a while. But if we're going to say, if our theme selection is selected, then we can have multiple actions here. We're not limited just to one action. We can have one condition creating multiple actions, or it can be multiple conditions, multiple actions. It's a real rabbit hole with this logic if you want to get to that stage. So let's just do a couple of these. I can say I want the name field. And you see all my options I've got here: size, font color, font itself, setting different text, setting position, all sorts of things we can do. I'm going to keep it simple just by changing the font color, go into my resource, and I'll set that to Coral. I can add a second action to that one thing. This is going to be for our job title. I'm going to set the font color yet again, based on a resource, and that's going to be navy. And then the final one I do is changing the image itself. So for this one, I'll choose the actual field. So I've not actually activated it on my form yet. So if I just go here and enable it, so Invent recognizes it as a modifiable field. I've got my crop mark image field, and I can directly say, set the image that's within that field. So I don't even have to go through a variable if I don't want to. And I'm going to set that as flip crop mark, and then that one will be Coral. Okay, and then we want to be able to switch between the themes. So I need to do the add else, when again, I can do multiple statements. So I'm just going to do the reverse of those three. And then one last one. And there we go. Okay, so now we're nearly ready to export. So before we do, for the final time, we could just go through a few of the other settings that we have. Things such as controlling the minimum image resolution. So it will tell you whether or not you get a warning message if somebody uploads a below required resolution image. You can specify various other bits and pieces in here. Nothing we're concerning about ourselves too much in this particular demonstration. Then I'm going to go with export. And for one final time, we will take this MEX file and import it into MegaEdit. Okay, and what have we done since the last time we tested this? We've got the theme and we've got the headshot. So let's take a look at those. So we've got our theme selection. We can see in our case, we kept it quite restrained, but we have got a changing image and font color. And we've got our headshot. By default, there's nothing being shown. I can say headshot required, and another option appears. And then I can choose between images that have already been uploaded, or I can upload new imagery if we want to do so. Okay, I think either I rushed that towards the end or it's been timed pretty well. I know that was much faster than normal. This recording will be available if you want to watch it back again or try alongside it with the resources I provided. And of course, the Academy has loads of slower, more detailed resources on how to do a lot of these things in a little bit more detail. So I hope this has been useful for you. If you would like to see more types of this webinar, so things like product build examples, please do just put a message in and let me know that it's been useful for you, because then I might do more types with different types of products and created in MegaEdit or whatever else. So do let me know if it's useful for you. All that's left to be said is thank you very much for watching. As you know, there's one of these every month or so keep an eye out for the next invite. If you have any final questions, please do put them in the questions panel, and we'll stay online for a little bit and try and answer them. Otherwise, thank you very, very much, and I'll speak to you next time.